My husband and I cut all expenses and prepared to close the deal on our first house. Then I found out my husband had secretly sent out money monthly to his brother to pay off his gambling debts. My husband Mark and I have been married for 4 years together for 7. We're both in our mid-30s and finally ready to buy our first house. We started our house fund 3 years ago with a goal of saving $80,000 for a down payment on a modest starter home in our area. Nothing fancy, just a 3-bedroom ranch we could actually afford with a decent school district. We've both been contributing $800 each month religiously. That's $1,600 total going into our savings every month for 3 solid years. That meant no vacations for 3 years, driving cars that are literally falling apart, meal prepping every goddamn Sunday, and saying no to basically everything that costs money. I drive a car with 180,000 miles and a check engine light that's been on for 2 years. The air conditioning died last summer and we just rolled the windows down instead of fixing it because every dollar was going to the house fund. Mark drives a 2012 Ford F-150. That sounds like a lawnmower when he starts it up. The transmission slips sometimes, but he just deals with it. We haven't eaten at a restaurant that isn't McDonald's or Taco Bell in over a year. Our idea of date night is renting a $4 movie from Redbox and making popcorn at home with butter-flavored salt because real butter costs too much. I wear the same 5 work outfits on rotation and haven't bought new clothes in 2 years. Mark's been wearing the same 3 pairs of jeans that are starting to get holes in the knees. We don't go to movies. We don't buy coffee. We pack lunches every single day. Our friends stopped inviting us places because we always said no to anything that cost money. But it was worth it, because we'd finally saved $52,000. We were so close to our goal. We found this perfect little house for $285,000. Nothing special, but it had a fenced yard for our dog Rex and was in a decent school district for when we have kids. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small garage, and most importantly, it was something we could actually afford in this economy. We were so excited to finally be homeowners instead of throwing money away on rent. The house had been on the market for 2 weeks, which is forever in this area. Everything decent gets snatched up in 2 to 3 days. We thought maybe it was our lucky break. We put in an offer and it got accepted. We were supposed to close in 30 days. So I'm sitting with our loan officer at First National Bank reviewing our bank statements when she asks about some discrepancies in our savings account. I'm confused because I track every single penny that goes into that account. She shows me the statements and there are all these transfers I don't recognize. $500 labeled utilities, $1,200 for groceries, $800 for car repair, $2,100 for emergency medical, $900 for home maintenance, all coming out of our house savings account over the past 6 months. At first, I thought it was identity theft or a bank error. These transfers were happening every couple weeks, and I had no memory of authorizing any of them. But then I noticed they were all going to the same external account. I asked the loan officer for the routing information, and when she showed it to me, I recognized it immediately. It matched Mark's brother Jake's bank details that I'd seen on Venmo before when we'd split dinner costs or whatever. I sat there doing math in my head while the loan officer kept talking about debt-to-income ratios. All these mysterious transfers added up to around $15,000. $15,000 of our house money was just gone transferred to Jake's account over 6 months without me knowing anything about it. I called Mark immediately. He was at his job at the electrical company and I could barely speak. When he answered, I asked him about the transfers to Jake's account. There was this long, dead silence on the other end. Not like he was thinking about what to say, like he knew exactly what I was talking about and was trying to figure out how to handle getting caught. Finally, he said, "We'll talk about this when I get home," in this really flat voice, and hung up on me. I spent the rest of the day at the bank going through every single transaction with a fine-tooth comb. The loan officer was patient, but I could tell she was getting annoyed because we were supposed to be finalizing paperwork, and instead I was having a breakdown over our financial records. The first transfer was $500 exactly 6 months ago, right around when Jake lost his job. Then it escalated gradually, $800, $1,200, $1,500, $2,100, and most recently, $3,000 just last month. All labeled as legitimate household expenses, but going straight to his unemployed brother's bank account. Jake is 30 years old and worked construction until he got laid off 8 months ago. He keeps saying something will come through soon, but hasn't actually applied anywhere as far as I can tell. He lives in the most expensive part of our city in a one-bedroom apartment that costs $1,800 per month. Meanwhile, Mark and I live in a tiny, 650-foot apartment that costs $1,100 because we were trying to save every possible dollar for our house. Jake has always been completely irresponsible with money. He's got this expensive gaming setup with a huge monitor and mechanical keyboard that probably costs $2,000 total. He collects vintage comic books and has shelves full of them in protective cases. He somehow always has money for concerts and craft beer and going out to bars with his friends. When we have family gatherings, Jake shows up in new clothes while Mark and I wear the same outfits from 3 years ago. His parents help him sometimes, but they're both retired and living on Social Security, so it's not like they can cover his rent every month. Jake's stepdad worked at the post office for 35 years, and his mom was a housewife. They're good people, but they don't have thousands of dollars lying around. When Mark got home from work that evening, I asked him directly what the hell was happening with these transfers to Jake. He tried to deny it at first, saying maybe someone had hacked our account or the bank made an error. When I showed him the routing number that matched Jake's account, his whole face changed. The color just drained out of it, and he sat down hard in the chair across from me. Then he got defensive, asking why I was monitoring our account like some kind of financial police officer. He said couples are supposed to trust each other, and I was acting like a crazy person by questioning legitimate expenses. I told him these weren't legitimate expenses. They were secret transfers to his brother that I knew nothing about. The bank caught it during our mortgage application process, not because I was snooping around. That's when he finally admitted he'd been sending Jake money for the past 6 months. His justifications were absolutely unbelievable. He said I wouldn't understand because I'm an only child and don't know what it's like to have family responsibilities. He said Jake would be homeless on the streets without help and that we couldn't just let family suffer. He said we could delay buying the house for another year or two because we're still young and have time. The one that really pissed me off was when he said that since he works overtime, sometimes some of that money was extra anyway, and he should be able to help his family with his own earnings. I pointed out that we had specifically agreed that every penny of his overtime would go to the house fund. That was the whole entire point of him picking up extra shifts on weekends and staying late during the week. Those overtime hours were supposed to get us to our goal faster, not subsidize his brother's expensive lifestyle. I asked him what Jake's plan was for getting back on his feet. Mark said Jake was actively looking for work and had some promising leads, but the job market was tough right now. When I asked for specifics about these leads, Mark couldn't give me any details. I said that even if Jake was struggling, he could move somewhere cheaper, get a roommate, or take literally any job to start bringing in some income. There are help wanted signs everywhere: restaurants, retail stores, warehouses, delivery services. Jake could be working tomorrow if he wanted to. Mark kept saying I didn't understand family loyalty and that Jake was going through the hardest time of his life. He said I was being cold and selfish for not wanting to help someone who was desperate. I asked him how long he planned to keep sending Jake money. He said until Jake got back on his feet financially. When I asked when that would realistically happen, he couldn't give me any kind of timeline, just vague promises about Jake finding something soon. I told him that he'd been hiding money for 6 months about where our money was going, that we'd been eating ramen noodles and rice so we could save for a house while he was secretly funding his brother's lifestyle, that I felt completely betrayed and didn't know if I could trust him anymore. Mark said he never meant to hurt me, but Jake was family and said he knew I'd get upset if he asked permission, so he figured it was better to just handle it quietly and pay the money back before I noticed. I asked him how exactly he planned to pay back $15,000 without me noticing that money appearing in our account. He didn't have an answer for that. The fight went on for hours. Mark kept insisting that he was doing the right thing by helping his brother and that I was being unreasonable. I kept pointing out that he'd stolen from our future together without my knowledge or consent. Finally, I told him I needed space to think and couldn't be in the same apartment with him right now. I packed a bag and went to stay with my best friend Sarah, who lives about 20 minutes away. That was 3 days ago, and I still feel completely lost. We lost the house. Obviously, by the time we could reschedule the mortgage appointment and get our finances sorted out, another couple had made an offer and it got accepted. The housing market here is absolutely insane right now, and everything decent gets multiple offers within 48 hours. My best friend went to Hawaii last year and kept sending me pictures of the beach. I told her it looked amazing, but we couldn't afford a vacation because we were saving for the house. Sarah keeps telling me I should just divorce Mark and move on with my life, but we've been together for 7 years. That's a huge chunk of my 20s and early 30s. We have a dog together, shared friends, a whole life built together. I don't know if this is something you can come back from or if it's a deal breaker. I also keep wondering what other financial secrets Mark might be hiding. If he could lie about $15,000 for 6 months, what else don't I know about? Are there credit cards? I don't know about other family members he's been helping. Jake hasn't even called to thank me or apologize for taking our house money. According to Mark, Jake doesn't know that I found out about the transfers. He thinks it's just Mark being a good brother and helping him out during a rough patch. I'm supposed to meet with Mark tomorrow to talk about what happens next. Part of me wants to give him a chance to fix this, but I honestly don't know how you rebuild trust after something like this. Has anyone dealt with something similar? How do you get past your spouse lying about money and stealing from your shared goals? I'm completely lost here. Update 1. Thanks for all the responses on my original post. Reading through everyone's advice has been helpful even though most people are telling me to run for the hills. I've been staying at my best friend Sarah's house because I literally could not handle being in the same space as Mark right now. He came by Sarah's place yesterday evening with a bouquet of daisies, my favorite flowers, and a box of Ghirardelli dark chocolate squares. I took them, though, like that was somehow going to fix the fact that he stole $15,000 from our future together. I told him I appreciated the gesture, but flowers and candy weren't going to make this go away. He looked like he was about to cry when I closed the door. I couldn't sleep that night anyway, so I decided to call Mark's mom, Linda, around 10 p.m. She's always been really good to me and treats me like the daughter she never had. I figured she deserved to know what was happening since Mark was probably going to paint me as the villain in all this. Linda was watching TV with Mark's stepdad. When I called, I could hear some cooking show in the background. When I told her what Mark had been doing with our house money, there was complete silence for about 30 seconds. Then she started asking rapid-fire questions about dates and amounts and how long it had been going on. Turns out Linda had absolutely no idea about the money transfers. When I explained that Mark had been sending Jake $15,000 over 6 months, she got really quiet and then said that son of a bitch under her breath. Not sure if she meant Mark or Jake or both. Linda said she'd been wondering how Jake was managing to afford his lifestyle since getting laid off 8 months ago. His unemployment benefits only covered about $200 per week, which definitely wasn't enough for a $1,800 apartment plus utilities, food, gas, and all his entertainment expenses. She assumed he was being responsible and had some savings built up or was really hustling to find work. Then Linda told me some things that made this whole situation even more infuriating. Jake didn't just politely decline job opportunities, he actually turned down 2 concrete job offers in the past month because they weren't good enough for him. One was $118 per hour doing warehouse work at a distribution center about 15 minutes from his apartment full-time with benefits and opportunities for overtime. Jake told Linda the work was beneath him and he wasn't going to waste his time. The second offer was $116 per hour at a different construction company doing the same type of electrical work he'd been doing before. Jake said the pay was too low, and he was holding out for something that paid at least $125 per hour. Linda pointed out that $116 per hour was better than $0 per hour, but Jake insisted he needed to know his worth. Meanwhile, he's been bragging to their extended family about Mark having his back and being such a generous brother. Apparently at their cousin Danny's birthday party 2 weekends ago, Jake was talking about how he didn't need to stress about money because Mark would always help him out. He told people that Mark understood family loyalty and would never let his little brother struggle. Danny's wife texted Linda after the party asking if everything was okay with Mark and me financially, since Jake was talking about how Mark was supporting him through his job search. Linda had no idea what Jake was talking about and told her everything was fine as far as she knew. The absolute worst part was when Linda told me about Jake's recent purchases. She'd been over to his apartment 2 weeks ago to bring him some leftover lasagna. While she was there, she noticed he had a brand new PlayStation 5 set up in his living room, along with a stack of new games still in the plastic wrap. When Linda asked where he got the money for a gaming console that costs $500 plus games, Jake said he'd been saving up his unemployment checks and finally treated himself to something nice. He said he deserved it after all the stress of being unemployed and job hunting. So while Mark and I are eating 99-cent boxes of macaroni and cheese to save money, Jake is buying luxury electronics with our house fund and bragging about it to the family. Linda was so angry when I told her all this. She said she was going to drive over to Jake's apartment right then and have it out with him, but I asked her not to say anything yet because I needed to figure out what I was doing with Mark first. Mark had been texting me constantly asking to meet and talk. Finally, yesterday evening, I agreed to meet him at our apartment so we could have a real conversation about where we go from here. When I got to our place, Jake was sitting on our couch eating a sandwich and watching YouTube on our TV. I was absolutely not expecting that. Mark said he thought it would be good for all three of us to clear the air and work through this situation together like adults. I should have turned around and walked out right then. Jake immediately went on the offensive before I could even sit down. He said I was being selfish about money and that family comes first, especially when someone is going through hard times. He said Mark was just being a good brother, and I should be proud to have married someone with such strong family values. Then Jake called me a bimbo for getting upset over a few thousand when Mark makes decent money at his job. He said Mark deserved better than someone who would abandon family members in their time of need and that he'd always thought I was too self-centered for his brother. The entire time Jake was going off on me, Mark just sat there staring at the floor like a freaking coward. He didn't defend me, didn't tell his brother to stop calling me names, didn't do anything. Just let Jake disrespect me in our own home while I stood there in shock. I asked Jake what his concrete plan was for paying us back the money. He actually laughed and said he didn't owe me anything because it was Mark's decision to help him out. When I pointed out that it was my money too since we're married, Jake said that was between me and Mark and had nothing to do with him. When I brought up the job offers he turned down, Jake got defensive and said they were dead-end positions with no room for growth. He claimed he was holding out for management opportunities and didn't want to get stuck in some warehouse job that would hurt his resume. This 30-year-old man has been unemployed for 8 months, is living off his brother's stolen money, just bought a PlayStation 5 with our house fund, and he thinks he's going to walk into some management position without any recent work experience. The delusion is absolutely unreal. I asked Jake when he planned to start contributing something, anything to his own survival, instead of mooching off Mark. He said he had several interviews lined up, which I doubt, and something would come through soon. When I asked for specifics about these supposed interviews, Jake said it wasn't my business, and he didn't need to justify his job search to his brother's wife. I walked out. Mark followed me to the parking lot and tried to explain that Jake was just feeling defensive and didn't mean the things he said. He asked me to come back inside so we could all talk it through calmly. I told Mark that if he wanted to choose his unemployed, disrespectful brother over his wife, he was welcome to do that, but I was done being treated like garbage in my own home. Mark said I was overreacting and that Jake was just stressed about his situation. He promised Jake would apologize for the name-calling and we could work something out that everyone was comfortable with. I asked Mark why he thought it was okay for Jake to call me a slut and a bimbo. Mark said Jake didn't really mean it and was just lashing out because he felt cornered. That's when I realized Mark wasn't going to stand up for me no matter what Jake did or said. His brother could disrespect me to my face, and Mark would just make excuses for him. I'm seriously considering separation at this point, like you guys said. I can't be married to someone who would lie to me for months, steal from our shared goals, and then let his brother verbally abuse me while he sits there doing nothing. Sarah says I should get a lawyer and start protecting my assets, but I'm hoping Mark will come to his senses and realize how badly he screwed up. Though after yesterday's disaster meeting, I'm not sure he's capable of that. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't keep living like this. Update 2. This week, I'm honestly exhausted from dealing with all this drama. Mark has been showing up at Sarah's apartment every other day with various peace offerings, my favorite Ghirardelli chocolate flowers coffee. Yesterday, he brought me a bag of those expensive dark chocolate-covered almonds because he knows I eat those when I'm on my period. I took the chocolate but told him it was going to take more than expensive snacks to fix the fact that he stole our house money and lied to me for months. He keeps saying he wants to compromise and work things out, but when I ask for specifics about his plan, he just gives me vague promises about setting boundaries with Jake and being a better husband. Meanwhile, Linda decided to take matters into her own hands and organized a family meeting to confront Jake about the money situation. She got Mark's stepdad, his Aunt Carol, and Uncle Mike, and asked if I wanted to participate over video call for moral support. I said yes, because I wanted to see how Jake would handle being confronted by the entire family about his behavior. That turned out to be a huge mistake. The meeting was at Linda and Mark's stepdad's house on Sunday afternoon. I joined via FaceTime from Sarah's place while the rest of the family gathered in their living room. Jake showed up 20 minutes late wearing a brand new hoodie that probably cost $80 and acting like he had no idea why everyone wanted to talk to him. Linda started by explaining that she'd found out about Mark sending Jake money from our house savings. Jake immediately got defensive and said that was between him and Mark and none of anyone else's business. When Linda pointed out that the money also belonged to me, Jake shrugged and said that was Mark's problem to figure out. Uncle Mike asked what kind of jobs Jake was looking for if warehouse work and construction weren't good enough. Jake said he was interested in management positions, sales roles, or maybe getting into the tech industry. When Mike pointed out that Jake had no experience in management, sales, or tech, Jake said he was a fast learner and just needed someone to give him a chance. The whole family was getting frustrated with Jake's attitude. But then Linda dropped a bomb that I wasn't expecting at all. Apparently Jake has a trust fund from his grandparents, Mark's mom's parents, that he's never touched. The old man died when Jake was 25 and left both boys $35,000 each. Mark used his share to pay for his electrician training and certification programs. Jake's money has just been sitting in an investment account earning interest for 5 years. When the family asked why he hasn't used any of the trust fund money to support himself, Jake said it was for emergencies only, and losing his job didn't count as a real emergency. He claimed he was saving it for something important like buying a house someday or starting a business. I lost my shit through the video call. I said that stealing our house money while sitting on $35,000 plus of his own money was the most selfish thing I'd ever heard of. Jake got defensive and said it wasn't stealing because Mark gave him the money willingly, and what he did with his inheritance was his own decision. Here's the part that really got to me. Mark actually agreed with Jake about not touching the trust fund. He said through the video call that maybe Jake is right to save it for something important, and that we shouldn't pressure him to use his inheritance for day-to-day expenses. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mark was defending Jake's decision to hoard his own money while stealing ours. I hung up the video call and turned off my phone for the rest of the day. Sarah found me crying in her guest bedroom an hour later. She brought me ice cream and let me vent about how backwards Mark's family priorities are. Even his own parents were horrified by Jake's attitude, but Mark was still making excuses for him. After the family meeting disaster, Mark came over to Sarah's place again. This time, I had a list of specific requirements ready for him. 1. Complete financial transparency. I get access to all accounts, credit cards, everything. 2. Jake pays back every single penny within 1 year with a written payment plan. 3. Marriage counseling starting immediately, non-negotiable. 4. No more money to Jake ever for any reason, even if he claims it's life or death. Mark agreed to the first requirement and said he'd already started gathering all our financial information to show me. He agreed to marriage counseling and said he'd already looked up therapists who take our insurance, but he completely balked at making Jake pay back the money. He said I can't squeeze blood from a stone and that Jake clearly doesn't have $15,000 lying around, even though Jake literally has more than double that amount sitting in his trust fund collecting interest. Instead of holding Jake accountable, Mark offered to work extra shifts and side jobs to replace the money himself. He said he could probably have it all paid back in 8 to 10 months if he really hustled and took on weekend work. When I asked why Jake shouldn't be responsible for paying back money he received and spent, Mark said I was being too harsh on someone who's already struggling with unemployment and depression. He said making Jake pay us back would just create more family drama and stress. I told Mark that until Jake took responsibility and agreed to a payment plan, I wasn't coming home. Mark said I was being unreasonable and that punishing Jake wouldn't solve anything. The housing situation has gotten so much worse too. We lost that first house obviously, but now prices in our area have gone up another 8% just in the past month. Houses that were listed at $280,000 are now going for $1,300,000 plus and getting multiple offers the first weekend. Even with our original $52,000, we'd need to save for another 2 years to afford anything decent in a neighborhood we'd actually want to live in. Our rent is also going up $200 per month when our lease renews in 3 months. So not only did we lose our house down payment, but our monthly expenses are increasing while home prices keep climbing. We're getting further away from home ownership, not closer. I've been looking at rental houses just to see what's available, but anything with a yard for Rex costs $2,200 plus per month. We can't afford that even with both our incomes, especially if Mark is working extra to pay back the Jake money instead of saving for a house. Sarah keeps telling me to just divorce Mark and start over. But 7 years is a long time to throw away. We have shared friends, shared debt, a whole life built together. I don't want to be a 33-year-old divorcee starting from scratch if there's any way to fix this marriage. I also told Mark he has 2 more weeks to get Jake to agree to a payment plan and take some responsibility for this mess. If that doesn't happen, I'm calling a divorce lawyer and we can figure out how to split our remaining assets. Mark said I was being dramatic and giving ultimatums instead of working together on a solution. I said the time for working together was before he spent 6 months lying to me about where our money was going. His whole family, excluding my mother-in-law, keeps calling me selfish and materialistic, but I'm the one who's been sacrificing for 3 years while Jake played video games with our money. I'm tired of being made out to be the villain for wanting basic accountability and respect. We'll see what happens in the next 2 weeks, but I'm not optimistic about Mark suddenly growing a backbone and standing up to his brother. Update 3. I was absolutely not prepared for what I found out this week. This whole situation has exploded into something way bigger and more serious than just Jake being unemployed and mooching off his brother. Mark showed up at Sarah's apartment on Tuesday evening completely broken down. I've known this man for 7 years, and I had never seen him cry like that before. Full, ugly crying, hyperventilating, couldn't catch his breath. At first, I thought someone had died or been in an accident. It took him 20 minutes to calm down enough to tell me what happened. Turns out, Jake wasn't just laid off from his construction job 8 months ago like he'd been telling everyone. He was fired for stealing tools and equipment from the job site. Multiple co-workers had reported missing items over several weeks: expensive power tools, copper wire electrical components, things that could easily be resold. When the foreman finally decided to check the security cameras, there was Jake loading stuff into his truck after hours when he thought no one would notice. The company fired him immediately and threatened to press charges, but Jake begged them not to involve the police and promised to pay back the value of everything he'd taken. They agreed not to prosecute as long as he stayed away from their job sites and didn't apply to work for any of their partner companies. But that's not even the worst part of the story. Jake has a serious gambling addiction that he's been hiding from the family for years. He's been betting on sports games and playing online poker since college, but it escalated dramatically after he got fired. The money Mark has been sending him wasn't going to rent and groceries like Jake claimed. It was going straight to cover his gambling debts. Jake owes money to multiple people. Now some guy named Tony has been calling Linda's house looking for Jake about $8,000 he owes from football bets that went bad. Another guy named Mike keeps showing up at Jake's apartment building asking about $4,500 Jake borrowed to play in some high-stakes poker game. Jake had been telling these people that his rich brother would cover his debts and they just needed to be patient while he arranged the money. He was using Mark's name and reputation to buy time with some seriously sketchy people. Mark finally admitted that he's known Jake had problems for months, but didn't know how serious it had gotten. He's been covering for Jake's mistakes since they were teenagers and didn't know how to stop the pattern even when it was destroying his own marriage. When their biological dad left when Mark was 17 and Jake was 12, Mark felt responsible for taking care of his little brother. Jake got into trouble in high school shoplifting from stores, skipping school, getting caught with weed, small stuff that could have been handled with grounding and supervision. But instead of letting Jake face consequences, Mark would always step in to fix things. He'd return stolen items and apologize to store managers. He'd forge notes to excuse Jake's absences. He'd take the blame when their mom found drugs in Jake's room. This pattern just continued into adulthood with bigger and bigger problems. Jake would screw up financially, or legally. Mark would bail him out with money or favors, and Jake never had to learn from his mistakes or develop any real coping skills. Mark said he estimated he's given Jake at least $40,000 over the past 12 years since Jake turned 18. Car payments when Jake got his license suspended for driving under the influence, rent deposits when Jake got evicted, credit card debt from Jake's shopping sprees, legal fees when Jake got arrested for bar fights, you name it. The conversation lasted 4 hours, and Mark was a complete mess the entire time. He kept apologizing over and over, saying he knew he destroyed our marriage, but didn't know how to stop enabling Jake without feeling like he was abandoning his little brother. I asked Mark why he never told me about any of this before we got married. He said he thought Jake had grown out of his problems and that the gambling and borrowing money was just a temporary thing from losing his job. When I pointed out that $15,000 over 6 months wasn't temporary help, but a massive ongoing financial commitment, Mark admitted he'd been in denial about how bad things had gotten. I told Mark I needed time to process everything he told me. This wasn't just about the house money anymore. This was about 15+ years of lies, a gambling addict brother-in-law who saw us as his personal bank account, and potentially dangerous people who thought Mark owed them money. I decided I needed a formal separation to figure out if this marriage was even salvageable. At this point, Mark moved back in with his parents the next day, and we agreed he'd start individual therapy before we even considered couples counseling. We froze all our joint accounts except for one checking account that Mark can use for necessities like gas and groceries. I set up online access so I can monitor every transaction, and he has to text me photos of receipts for any purchases over $200. Mark also agreed to take on extra work to start repaying the $15,000 he gave Jake. He picked up weekend shifts doing electrical work for a buddy's contracting company and signed up to do DoorDash deliveries in the evenings after his regular job. The money situation is actually working out better than I expected. Mark has managed to put $2,000 back into our account in just 3 weeks by working basically every waking hour. He's exhausted, but says he's determined to fix what he broke. Jake, meanwhile, has been calling Mark constantly asking for more money. Apparently, Tony and his friends have been showing up at Jake's apartment building and making threats about what happens to people who don't pay their debts on time. Jake wanted Mark to give him $5,000 to make this problem go away and promised it would be the last time he ever asked for help. When Mark said he didn't have $5,000 and wasn't giving Jake any more money anyway, Jake completely lost it. Jake screamed that Mark was letting him get killed over stupid money and called him a selfish piece of shit for choosing his psycho wife over his own flesh and blood. He said the family would never forgive Mark if something happened to him because Mark was too cheap to help. For the first time in his life, Mark hung up on Jake mid-tantrum. Jake then started calling Linda and his stepdad, crying about how Mark had abandoned him and was going to let him get hurt by dangerous people. But Linda and Mark's stepdad are finally seeing Jake for who he really is after everything that's come out. Linda told Jake that if he was really worried about his safety, he needed to use his trust fund to pay off his debts and get professional help for his gambling addiction. She said the family wasn't going to keep enabling his destructive behavior by bailing him out every time he got in trouble. Jake actually had the nerve to say that his trust fund was off limits and that families should help each other without conditions. Linda hung up on him too. I don't know if Mark and I are going to make it through this mess, but seeing Mark actually stand up to Jake for the first time in his life gives me a tiny bit of hope that maybe he's finally ready to change. The gambling addiction and dangerous people Jake owes money to makes everything more complicated, though. I'm worried about Mark's safety too now, not just our marriage and finances. Update 4. A lot has happened since my last update, and there's finally some resolution to this entire nightmare, though not in ways I expected. Jake got arrested 3 weeks ago, and it was the wake-up call everyone needed. He managed to get another job, probably lied about why he was fired from the last one, and lasted exactly 4 days before getting caught stealing copper wire and expensive power tools on camera again. This time there were multiple witnesses, and the foreman called the police immediately, instead of giving Jake a chance to make it right. Jake was arrested on the job site in front of all his Kio workers and spent 2 nights in county jail before anyone even knew what happened. He called Mark from jail at 6 a.m., begging him to post the $5,000 bail. Mark said no. Jake then called Linda and his stepdad, crying and pleading, but they said no too. Jake finally had to swallow his pride and use $6,000 from his precious trust fund to pay for a lawyer and bail himself out. The lawyer Jake hired says he'll probably get probation and community service since it's technically his first official conviction. The previous theft was handled privately, but Jake now has to check in with a probation officer every week. More importantly, Linda called a family meeting the day after Jake got out of jail and demanded complete honesty about his financial situation. Jake broke down and admitted he owed nearly $15,000 total to various people from sports betting and poker games. The money Mark had been sending wasn't covering rent and food. It was going straight to pay interest on Jake's debts to keep these guys from getting more aggressive. Linda told Jake he had exactly 1 week to use his trust fund money to pay off every person he owed and get himself into intensive gambling treatment. She said if he didn't handle it immediately, she and Mark's stepdad would cut him off completely, and he'd have to figure out his problems on his own. Jake tried to argue that using his inheritance for gambling debts wasn't what his grandfather intended the money for. Linda said she was sure his grandfather didn't intend for Jake to steal from his brother's marriage either. Within 5 days, Jake had paid off Tony, Mike, and the other people who were threatening him. He moved back in with his parents and started attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings. He also got a job at Target making $1.15 per hour and has to turn over his entire paycheck to Linda so she can manage his expenses and make sure he's not gambling. As for Mark, he's continued individual therapy for 6 weeks now, and it's been really helpful for him to understand how messed up his relationship with Jake became over the years. Mark has been working his ass off to pay back the money he gave Jake. Between his regular job weekend electrical work and DoorDash deliveries every evening, he's already managed to pay back $4,000 of the $15,000. At this rate, he should have the rest paid back in about 6 more months. Linda and Mark's stepdad felt terrible about everything that happened and offered to contribute $5,000 as a gift to help us get back on track faster. I accepted it because, honestly, we need all the help we can get if we're ever going to be able to buy a house. Jake was also forced to sign a legal promissory note for $15,000 of what he owes us. His parents insisted on it and said if he didn't take responsibility for his part in this mess, they'd kick him out of their house. The payments are only $200 per month because that's all he can afford on his target salary, but it's something. Jake is not allowed to contact me directly at all. Linda enforced this rule after I told her about him calling me names and disrespecting me in our own apartment. She said if Jake so much as texts me or approaches me in public, he'll be out of their house immediately. The whole family has finally started setting real boundaries with Jake instead of just enabling his bad behavior. It took him getting arrested and owing money to dangerous people, but they're finally treating him like the adult he is instead of making excuses for him. As for Mark and me, we're taking things very slowly. He's continued individual therapy, and I started going to couples counseling sessions with him twice a week. We're working through a lot of trust issues and communication problems that go way beyond just the Jake situation. I decided to give our marriage another real chance, but with strict conditions that we put in writing. Mark has to continue individual therapy for at least another full year. We're also getting a post-nuptial agreement drawn up by a lawyer that protects my assets and clearly states that any future financial help to family members requires both our written signatures. We still can't afford to buy a house anytime soon. Between the money Jake took, Mark's reduced income from therapy appointments, and housing prices that keep climbing, we're probably looking at another 1.5 years of saving at minimum. But at least now I know every dollar going into that account is actually staying there. The rental market is just as bad as the housing market. Our landlord raised our rent $250 per month when we renewed the lease. So we're actually spending more on housing now than before this whole mess started. We looked at moving somewhere cheaper, but everywhere decent costs about the same or requires a longer commute to our jobs. I'm not going to pretend everything is perfect between Mark and me. There are days I still feel really angry about the lies and the time we lost because of his poor decisions. Some mornings I wake up and wonder if I'm making a mistake by trying to save this marriage. But Mark has shown genuine remorse and made real changes to his behavior. He's working incredibly hard to pay back the money and rebuild trust. He's finally learned to say no to Jake and set boundaries with his family. Some people said I should have just divorced Mark immediately, but I'm glad I took the time to see if he was willing and able to make real changes. If this same situation happened again, I'd probably handle it differently.